frosty wind made moan. Earth stood hard as iron, water like a stone. Snow had fallen, snow on snow, snow on snow on snow. In the bleak midwinter, long ago, Christ a homeless stranger, so the Gospels say, cradled in a manger and a bed of hay. In the bleak midwinter, stable place sufficed. Mary and her baby, Jesus Christ. Once more child and mother weave their magic spell, touching hearts with wonder words can never tell. In the bleak midwinter, in this world of pain, where our hearts are open, love is born again.
Good evening and welcome. Welcome to our unusual Christmas Eve service in such an unusual year. We are so glad to be with you for this time hosted by the Foothills Unitarian Church and the Unitarian Universalist Church of Cheyenne, Wyoming. Communities that both affirm that no matter who you are or how you're arriving to this night in this year, you are worthy of love and belonging without exception.
We know that all of us are arriving here tonight with both gratitude and grief. Gratitude for the unique opportunities allowing us to be together in this way, for the privilege of being in your homes for Christmas Eve, and for having you here in ours. And joy at the opportunity to celebrate this service as a partnership between our congregations.
We know that many of us are missing our family and friends, those people that we would regularly gather with together in these moments. We're missing the sanctuary, whose darkened state would invite a reverent contemplation and connection to days, years, and millennia ago. A place where we could sing together and remember the stories of the season. And it's been for many of us a year of missing those we love, traditions we love, people we love, and we're not done yet. Through all of tonight, we hope you know and feel that you are not alone.
For the hour ahead, we invite you to feel the connection of so many of us who are also at home, watching with you, hearing these stories of Christmas, singing these traditional songs. Even though we are apart, we are still so connected. I invite you to settle into these stories, let the magic spark something in you, that sense that the world as it has been is not the world as it will be.
Find here a surge of hope for the great unknown of the future, and the chance for us to keep responding to the call of love, to keep showing up for each other, and to keep offering our gifts on behalf of a greater good and a wider love. Let's settle in now as together we begin our Christmas Eve service.
Tonight we celebrate the relentless presence of love. Love, unconditional and perfect. Love born in the world again and again. Love ready to heal and forgive and unite across all differences and divides. Love that overcomes distance and felt even though screens and speakers. Love born in each of us, offering itself to all. Love that will not give up. Love that cannot stop making room for you. Here in this ancient story, told and retold across centuries and cultures, a tale of people seeking shelter from the cold after a long journey, people met by kindness in the silent night. Whoever you are, whatever the state of your heart, weary, wild, filled with wonder, the call to rejoice rings out for all, to be held in this hope that love is not done with its work. Its work on this life, in this world, that love, new born, is just getting started. So let us kindle once again the light of hope. And celebrate Christmas once more. Come, let us worship together.
Joy to the world, the word is come. Let earth with praises ring. Let every heart prepare a room, and heaven and nature sing, and heaven and nature sing, and heaven and nature sing. Joy to the earth, let gladness reign. Let dogs their songs employ, while fields and floods, rocks, hills and plains repeat the sounding joy, repeat the sounding joy, repeat the sounding joy.
In those days, a decree went out from the emperor in Rome that everyone would be required to participate in a massive census. All went to their ancestral city to be counted. Joseph also went from the town of Nazareth to Galilee in Judea, to the city of David called Bethlehem, because he was descended from the house and family of David. Joseph went to be registered with Mary, to whom he was engaged and expecting a child. While they were there, the time came for her to deliver her child, and she gave birth to her firstborn son, and wrapped him in a blanket, and laid him in a feeding trough, because there was no room for them in the inn. In that region, there were shepherds living in the fields, keeping watch over their flock in the dark of night. Suddenly, an angel of the Lord stood before them, and darkness was replaced by a glorious light, the light of God's glory. They were terrified. But the angel said to them, "Do not be afraid, for see, I bring you good news of great joy for all people everywhere. Today, in the city of David, a liberator has been born for you. He is the Messiah, the Lord. You will know you have found him when you see a baby wrapped in a blanket and lying in a feeding trough." And suddenly there was with the angel a multitude of other angels, a vast heavenly choir, praising God and saying, "Glory to God in the highest heaven, and on earth, peace among all people." When the angels left them and returned to heaven, the shepherds said to one another, "Let us go now to Bethlehem and see this thing that has taken place, which the Lord has made known to us." So they went with haste and found Mary and Joseph and the child lying in the feeding trough. When they saw this, they told everyone what had been told to them about this child, and all who heard it were amazed at what the shepherd told them. Mary treasured all these words and pondered them in her heart. The shepherds returned, glorifying and praising God for all they had seen and heard as it had been told by them.
The first Noel, the angel did say, was to certain poor shepherds in fields as they lay, in fields where they lay keeping their sheep on a cold winter's night that was so deep. Noel, 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 born is the King of Israel.
A few days ago, doctors at Stanford Medical Center staged a protest. The hospital had been rolling out its program to vaccinate its staff for COVID-19 now that the vaccines are approved for emergency use. And in the interests of equity, the administrators had pulled together an algorithm to decide who would be vaccinated first, because of course there wasn't enough for everyone, at least initially. What was revealed once the lists were posted was those who seemed to have the highest risk were placed lower down on the list. High-ranking administration officials were getting vaccinated before residents. People working from home were being vaccinated before frontline nurses. And so doctors and nurses and other healthcare staff stood in a silent protest demanding a shift in the vaccine schedule. Now, when I heard this news, the first question that came to my mind was, how could this happen? I mean, how could the smart people at Stanford Medical School make such a decision? But almost as quickly as that question came into my mind, the answer arrived as well. I mean, isn't this the same decision that we as humans have made for centuries? Those with power always seem to end up at the front of the line, at the top of the list, in the express lane towards security, autonomy, and vitality. It's interesting that every time I encounter the story of the Nativity, a different part strikes a chord with me. And this year, as I re-encountered the story of Jesus' birth, what struck me most was the position of the shepherds. Because in the time of Jesus, shepherds were considered unclean and outcasts. For the majority of shepherds could not practice the customs of the time to be considered clean. And yet their work of tending to the sheep in many ways was essential. It was essential for feeding the very people that would outcast them from their social circles, who would consider them unclean ritually. The story of Luke and the annunciation of Jesus' birth to the shepherds upends the social order. Those who were last are suddenly placed first, putting those who were cast out or seen as unfit or unwell to the top of the list instead of where they usually end up at the bottom. It challenges our society, whose class and caste systems systematically places many people outside the realm of the worthy, while at the same time depending on the extraction of their labor the exertion of their bodies, for the livelihoods of a few to continue in excess. But what the story tells us is that the shepherds weren't given charity, they were made first. They were not just given enough Jesus to tide them over for a week. They were offered a complete and intimate invitation to be one of the first to attend to his new life. Who in our time are the shepherds? Whose labor do you, do I, do we depend on in seen and unseen ways? At the same time as we act as though their lives are disposable with the choices that we collectively make, that the contraction of disease is an unfortunate but necessary cost to their lot of life. Who are the shepherds of our time, and what would it mean to put the good news of vaccines, government stimulus, and our daily choices? What would it mean to bring them the good news? What would it mean to bring the good news of our collective salvation first to frontline workers? All too essential like the shepherds, and yet cast aside. Shepherds were the frontline workers of their day. The grocery workers, the janitors, the sanitation workers, the nurses and teachers, the doctors, the cashiers, protected by thin plexiglass but not comprehensive health care or sick leave, seen as necessary but not treated as such. What would it mean to put them first in line to not only hear but to witness the good news, to receive the gift of possibility for a new life? And what would it mean for people of privilege, for white people, to when we hear and witness the truth of our society and our place in it, to drop what we are doing and go and take our bodies to where they are needed to go, to open up our wallets and our investment accounts and invest it in the places that need the good news.
to show God's us love aright. She bore to us a Savior when absent was the night.
Our prayer tonight is adapted from the words of the Iona community. When the world was full of fear and the city was quiet, you came. You crept in beside us, and no one knew. Only the few who dared to believe that God might do something different. Will you do the same this Christmas night? Will you come into the fear and isolation of tonight's world, in which people have stopped believing that war will end, or that food will come, or that a government will change? Will you come into those stories and do something different to save your people from death and despair? Will you come into the quietness of this city? Not the friendly quietness as when lovers hold hands, but the fearful silence when the phone has not rung, the letter has not come, the friendly voice no longer speaks, the doctor's face says it all. Will you come into that moment of fear and do something different? Not to distract, but to embrace your people. And will you come into the shadowed corners and the quiet places of our lives? We ask this not because we are guilt-ridden or want to be, but because the fullness of our lives longs for and depends on being as open and vulnerable to you as you were to us when you came wearing no more than diapers and trusting human hands to hold their maker. Will you come into our lives if we open them to you and do something different? When the world was full of fear and the city was quiet, you came. You crept in beside us. Do the same this Christmas, Lord. Do the same this Christmas. Amen.
It never fails that Christmas comes when I'm not quite ready. It's particularly problematic given my profession, but I know I'm not alone, right? It's always such a shock after Thanksgiving. I mean, here comes December and the rush of balancing it all. The shock of winter and the darkness that comes at 7 and then at 6 and then at 5 and then suddenly Christmas is here. Christmas and I'm not quite ready. But Christmas doesn't usually care. We come to this night and we tell these stories and we sing these songs, and somehow by the end of the night I feel more connected to joy and hope and love. But this year, as we tend to say, this year is different, this unprecedented year, so that what it means to be unprepared for Christmas feels unprecedented too. This year, Christmas, with its messages of welcoming in strangers who arrive at your door in the middle of the night, and its story of strangers who do not share the same household, all gathering in close around a baby and a mother who has just given birth. All of these stories and messages feel a little extra inaccessible this year. Inaccessible, just like the traditions we come to know and love this time of year, big parties of friends and families with big buffets of food, with big hugs and sneaky kisses under the mistletoe, things that will just not fully translate through the screen, no matter how hard we try. I mean, there is a lot of blessing here, but it's still not the same. And so this year, it's not totally obvious that we would leave this night feeling any more connected to hope and joy and love than we were the night before or the night before that. Like many of you, I grew up with a practice that would help me and our community prepare for Christmas Eve so that we could be more ready. Each of the Sundays of December, we'd light a candle in the Advent wreath. In the little Catholic church where I grew up, we had a big Advent wreath where each Sunday we would light a candle first for joy and then hope and then peace and then love. I might not have that order correct. And with each passing week, we'd make space in our hearts for the arrival of Christmas. O come, Emmanuel. We'd sing, which it turns out that song, it is basically a list of demands to whomever is listening to please come and take us away from this feeling, this time, this place that we are stuck in.
Come, O come, Emmanuel.
Emmanuel translates simply, God with us. The early Christian church took this name from the Hebrew Bible, the prophet Isaiah, and they concluded it pointed to Jesus and his birth, that in his birth, God came to be with us, to save us from whatever lonely exile we dwell in. And the good news of Christmas then is that we don't need to wait any longer for things to get better. God is with us here and now, and the new world starts now. So this year, in our struggle to prepare, I think we could use something a little like Advent. Not because we need to prepare exactly for Jesus's birth per se, or even because we need to better schedule our time so that we can get all the Christmas presents bought and wrapped, or the decorations up, or the cookies baked. We need a practice this year and an intention where we can acknowledge that things are hard and different and distant in all sorts of ways, and we aren't sure how they're going to get better. We need a practice and an intention where we can make space for the grief and the loss present always at this time of year, but especially this year. The grief and the loss, maybe the anger that has brought us to this moment. We need to make space for all of these things so that we can get in touch with our need and our longing and our demand, held in that cry for Emmanuel, the longing and the demand for Christmas and its promise of real comfort and real connection and hope, not in some distant future, but now. Making space for this in us and in ourselves in turn makes space for this longing and this demand collectively across all of us, across our country, across the whole world. We all need not a theoretical, distant notion of love, but love embodied and present, love you can hug and kiss and touch and feel in your skin. We need love incarnate, love like the arrival of a new baby this year. It's not that we aren't ready for Christmas, but rather this year we need Christmas. The real hope and message of Christmas, the promise of God with us, love with us now more than ever. So this year, Christmas is an invitation and a call for us to be Emmanuel for each other, to make space for the struggle and the suffering that exists collectively, to show up with compassion especially for ourselves, to believe and to act as if we are all doing the best we can. Really, we are all doing the best we can. This Christmas, we can be for each other, not just that longing for God, but also the presence of God. What I mean is the presence of the ultimate, cooperative, emergent, transforming love in the world, not in some future time, but now. Come, Christmas, come, Emmanuel. Let us be that love for each other and for the world now.
Rejoice, rejoice, Emmanuel shall come within us, hope to dwell.
Oh, holy night, the stars are brightly shining. It is the night of our dear Savior's birth. Long lay the world in sin and error pining, till he appeared and the soul felt its worth. A thrill of hope, the weary world rejoices, for yonder breaks a new and glorious morn. Fall on your knees. Oh, hear the angel voices. Oh, night divine. Oh, night when Christ was born. Oh, night divine. Oh, night divine.
A reading from Matthew chapter 2, verses 1 to 12. In the time of King Herod, after Jesus was born in Bethlehem of Judea, wise men from the east came to Jerusalem asking, "Where is the child who has been born King of the Jews? For we observed his star at its rising and have come to pay him homage." When King Herod heard this, he was frightened, and all of Jerusalem with him. And calling together all of the chief priests and the scribes of the people, he inquired of them where the Messiah was to be born. They told him, "In Bethlehem of Judea, for so it has been written by the prophet. And you, Bethlehem, in the land of Judah, are by no means least among the rulers of Judah, for from you shall come a ruler who is to shepherd my people Israel." Then Herod secretly called for the wise men, and learned from them the exact time when the star had appeared. He sent them to Bethlehem, saying, "Go and search diligently the child, and when you have found him, bring me word so I may also go and pay him homage." When they heard the king, they set out, and there ahead of them went the star that they had seen at its rising, until it stopped over the place where the child was. When they saw the star had stopped, they were overwhelmed with joy. On entering the home, they saw the child with Mary his mother. They knelt down and paid him homage. Then, opening their treasure chests, they offered him gifts of gold, frankincense, and myrrh. And having been warned in a dream not to return to Herod, they left for their own country by another road.
When our daughter Ada was born, we were blessed with so many gifts. And these gifts ranged in utility from a car seat to a diaper pail. They were books and puzzles and games, and perhaps the most blessed of all, the world's biggest and most delicious lasagna I have ever eaten, to be pulled from our freezer in the kind of lasagna emergency that really only happens to new parents. And so there were all of these gifts that folks in our community were eager to share, to celebrate new life. And this urge to celebrate new life with gifts, well, it's a pretty ancient one. But of all these gifts we received, the one that I remember most fondly is the gift of time. The gift of time to be together as a family, of time to spend with our new child, of time for our daughter to meet her grandparents, of time. And in that time, I felt and experienced a reordering, a shifting of priorities and of possibilities. Things that seemed so important just a few weeks prior had now suddenly flown out the window, and things I had never imagined were at the forefront of my heart and mind and soul. One of the gifts of parenting is that it reorders our lives. One of the gifts of caregiving of all kinds is that it reorders our hearts and our priorities. It helps us clarify what matters. And in this version of the story of the birth of Jesus from the book of Matthew, we see the Magi coming bearing gifts of gold and frankincense and myrrh. Words that were so amusing and mysterious to me as a child until I learned out that they were just, perfume and incense and, gold. And it's easy to kind of chuckle as we look back at those gifts and think, gosh, how useless for a newborn. Who needs a bar of gold when they have a crying infant? But these gifts from the Magi were like the gift of time at the birth of our daughter. These gifts from the Magi are about a reordering. Because you see, these gifts of gold and frankincense and myrrh, of incense and perfume, expensive treasures, right? It says they opened their treasure chest to share these gifts with the newborn baby and its parents. These treasures remind us of who Jesus would become. Because you see, these gifts, these fancy treasures, these beautiful and impractical objects that show up at the birth of Jesus tell us that he will be a leader. That he will be like royalty. He will be a new kind of leader. He will be the kind of leader of the kind of community where the first shall be last and the last shall be first. He will be the kind of leader of the kind of community where there is a radical reordering, a reprioritization, a shift that clarifies what really matters and who really matters. These gifts remind us of the promise of a community where it is not the king who gets the most beautiful or the most marvelous gifts, but the common people. These gifts remind us of a community where wealth is not reserved for the few, but for the many. These gifts remind us of the promise of a community where all people, each and every baby, no matter the station of their birth, is viewed as divine, as blessed, as imbued with infinite possibility from their very first breath. These gifts remind us that we are called to use our own gifts, to do this kind of radical reordering, to bring that community into existence. These gifts remind us that the work of building a beloved community where the first shall be last and the last shall be first, that the work of building that community does not belong only to some small group of people or a certain race of people. It belongs to all of us, even wandering travelers. And so this Christmas, how will we use our gifts? How will we use our gifts to reorder, to reprioritize, and to get clear about the kind of community we want to create? How will we use our gifts? How will we use our gifts?
As we reach the end of this difficult year, I actually keep having the impulse to make lists of things I'm grateful for. I know it's not the usual impulse that we have about this year. It's just that for all that's been hard, I've been amazed at all the gifts that I have been given along the way. Gifts that we've all been given this year. One of those gifts is the chance to be with each other in community like this. I mean, who could have ever imagined a year ago that we would be partnering with other UU churches and colleagues on Christmas Eve? What a gift. Thank you, Hannah, for your message. And thank you to the UU Church of Cheyenne, and also a shout out to the UU Church of Ogden, who I think are with us as well this evening, and all those across the area and across the world who are joining together tonight. It's such a gift to be together. It's also been a gift to welcome people from all over the world throughout this whole time in ways we would have never connected before when we weren't all online. If you are someone who is visiting us this evening, welcome. It is a gift to be with you in this way, to be in the challenge together and to be in community together, to be hope for each other. If you want to learn more about Foothills or about the tradition Unitarian Universalism of which we are a part, you can text the word newish to 97000. Whoever you are, if you're just curious and you'd like to learn a little more, begin to make connections, we'd love to reach back out to you and begin to weave those connections in that community together. We also want to make a special invitation to all of you to join in our service on January 3rd. That's the first service of 2021. Because this has been a difficult year, on the 3rd, we're throwing ourselves a pity party. Look for more information on our Facebook page or in your email if you're on our email list. It's going to be awesome and cathartic, and it will include our magical tradition of fire communion, which is always a gift. You don't want to miss it. These days, like the days of our story, there are many in our community who also feel scared, who feel unsure about their future. unsure what's going to happen and if they will be okay. 10 months into the pandemic, with the eviction moratorium set to expire in just a few days, applications for support to help with housing payments are at an all-time high. Like the young family in our story, families in our own community are facing the possibility of being left without shelter in an extremely vulnerable time, not just in the middle of a pandemic, but in the middle of winter. Affordable housing in our community was already at a crisis point long before this year, but many who were already a little on the edge but hanging in there are now finding themselves facing impossible and unforeseen circumstances far beyond their control. Tonight, we have the chance to be that innkeeper that looks into the face of those with nowhere else to turn and says, we will make room. And tonight, we have the chance to be that angel in the story that says, be not afraid. We got you. This Christmas, we can be that community that makes room in our hearts by giving in a way that feels good to help our neighbors. Oh, giving in a way that says we know that none of us can have a real Christmas, the real message of Christmas, if any of us are left out in the cold. We can surround our neighbors in solidarity, generosity, and in love. You can give this evening by texting the amount to give that you want to give and the word share to 84321. So you might text 100 share to 84321 or 200 share, or get the idea, whatever amount is the amount that your heart calls you to give. You can also give by going to the link foothillsuu.org/share the plate. Everything you give will be shared equally to support our neighbors through Neighbor to Neighbor, and to support the mission of Foothills Unitarian and the UU Church of Cheyenne, missions both of unleashing courageous love in northern Colorado and southern Wyoming and far beyond. We will now gratefully receive your offering.
We three kings of Orient are, bearing gifts we traverse afar, field and fountain, moor and mountain, following yonder star. Oh, star of wonder, star of light, star with royal beauty.
At times our own light goes out and is rekindled by the spark from another person, the Unitarian Albert Schweitzer wrote. Each of us has great cause to think with deep gratitude for those who have lighted the flames within us. As we come to the close of our service, of our sacred times of stories of memories, of scripture and song, of connection through this medium that we have come to know and loathe and love, we turn for a moment to a time of gratefulness. Gratefulness for the ways that we can remain connected to one another, even in this time of distance. Gratefulness for the stories of old that can, with intention and care, be made new and play out into our lives in unexpected ways. Gratefulness for the stories of challenge and opportunity and possibility that are at the heart of this season, that tells us that even when we think the story ends, it's not the end of the story. And this has been a year in which we have needed to remind ourselves that this collective story, this collective life that we are embarking on together we are not at the end, but merely in the middle of a chapter that we have a hand in writing, and we take heart. Because deep within us are the seeds of the future waiting to sprout in our waiting to sprout in moments small and big, fertilized by those who have gone before, tended to by a community of care, and welcomed into being by a spirit larger than we can ever even imagine. And so we rest in that gratefulness, in the silent stillness of our lives, in that great gratitude for this opportunity to celebrate this sacred evening of ordinary magic together, of revisiting tradition anew, but capturing the heart. And so I invite you to find a candle about, to take a moment and honor that person, that moment from this year in which someone lit the flame within you as you light it, honoring that person and their act in gratefulness as we close this time together singing Silent Night. These words from Howard Thurman are especially important for us this year.
When the song of the angels is stilled,
When the star in the sky is gone,
When the kings and princes are home,
when the shepherds are back with their flocks.
The work of Christmas begins.
To find the lost, to heal the broken,
To feed the hungry, to release the prisoner,
To rebuild the nations.
To bring peace among the siblings.
to make music in the heart.
Tonight marks not the ending of Christmas, but just the beginning.
Go in peace and Merry Christmas.
Lum,